I'm Jim Motavalli. We're here with Jay Leno, host of Jay Leno's Garage, and for a long time, The Tonight Show. We're going to talk about electric cars today. And for many years, have been the king of internal combustion, but I've long noticed you've had this interest in batteries and electric, and you dearly loved your Chevy Bolt, which you put 80,000 miles on. Is that right?
Right. Well, I like anything that rolls, explodes, makes noise, any sort of transportation. You know, at the turn of the century, the three kinds of cars dominated the market. You had 33% electric, 33% steam, and approximately 33%, give or take some fractions, internal combustion. And no one really knew which one was going to win out. I mean, Edison was touting his new, what they called alkaline battery at the time. I've got one of the actual batteries he made, and that was going to revolutionize. You know, there was a luncheon meeting. Henry Ford was very enamored by Edison, and Edison slipped him a note at a dinner party saying, my new alkaline battery is going to put, you know, the gas car out of business. And of course it didn't, but electricity was really quite reliable, and it could have gone either way. It was sort of like Beta and VHS, you know. I mean, Beta was better than VHS, but VHS flooded the market, made them cheap, accessible. VHS tapes were on movies. So consequently, Beta went the other way. And the same thing with internal combustion. It was loud and explosive. It made noise. People liked that. But the biggest mistake with the electric car initially was they were marketed as women's cars.
Right.
Rich men could buy them for women. And when you look at early electric cars, they have a lot of feminine features. I have a Baker Electric. It has a woman's compact for face powder and makeup, and a little notepad with a sterling silver pen to write on, and there were vases. And like even today, you can sell a woman a man's car. You can't sell a man a woman's car. Guys are pretty.
Part of the idea, Jay, wasn't it that electric cars didn't go that far, but they said, this was totally sexist, but they said that women didn't travel very far. It was the women's sphere, was, you know, to the grocery store and to home. It wasn't.
Well, the idea was, the reason it appealed to women was you didn't have to start it. Brute strength was not required. This is cars.
Crank it.
Yeah, cars had to be hand cranked, and a lot of men broke their arm. In fact, there was a guy named Carter. He did the Carter car. It was a friction drive deal, and he was driving around. He saw a woman stuck on the railroad tracks, and he went over to help her, and he pulled the starter handle, but the woman had advanced the ignition. You're supposed to retard the ignition. The ignition full, so the car backfired, and the hand came around, and he punched himself in the jaw, went to the hospital, and later died of blood poisoning. And this guy was pretty popular, and he was a friend of Kettering. And Kettering vowed to make an electric starter. Kettering worked for American Cash Register. He took a cash register electric motor, geared it down, and invented the electric starter.
He also put lead into gasoline, but that's a whole other.
Right. That wasn't one of the better moves. But anyway, electric cars were just hard for women to maneuver. I mean, gas cars were hard for women to maneuver and start, and heavy steering and all that kind of stuff. So the electric car was just better suited at the time. You know, at the turn of the century, they never thought anybody would drive more than 30 miles in a day. That was considered a huge. So the idea of women not going very far, well, you couldn't go very far because there weren't any roads just around the cities. You had cobblestone and whatnot like that. So it was mostly the fact that rich men bought these as accessories for their wives, and that was another problem.
Basically, by about 1920, it was pretty clear that the gas car had won.
Right.
We didn't really get an electric car revival until the 60s, but at that point, batteries still were pretty bad, so that didn't really work.
Batteries are pretty much, well, I'll give you a try. My Baker Electric goes 80 miles on a charge.
Really?
It's 1909. Okay. So that shows you lead acid batteries had really not improved much. In the last 2 decades, it's been, oh my God, almost like Moore's Law. Every year it halves in size and doubles in volume. So it's been pretty amazing. I remember seeing electric cars in the 60s. It would have a trailer hitch with a small U-Haul type trailer filled with batteries, and it would drag that along and go down the road. So it's really only in the last few decades there's been this tremendous resurgence.
Well, this is for the Green Wheels Expo, which we do in Fairfield, Connecticut. We get like 300 people come out this year. It's virtual, so it's why we're doing this way. I know you go to a lot of car events. What EVs have you seen, that the current ones that were impressive to you?
Well, electricity is like sex. All guys lie about it, I mean, I get so tired of electric motorcycles go 100 miles on a charge, and then you drive them or you ride them and you realize, no, they only go about 30 miles on a charge. If you're not a Japanese hunger striker driving naked and just barely touching the throttle with your toe, you're not going to get any mileage, and that's sort of the problem. Everybody promises all of this stuff with electric.
The weather has to be perfect too.
It's got to be 74 degrees. The only one that has fulfilled the promise is Elon. And he's got to be given a tremendous amount of credit. It's amazing to me. We used to be a nation who worshipped innovation and invention. Now we're getting like the British, noble failures. We like that more than successes. We like to revel in somebody's failure. I mean, when I would see people go after, I don't mean to pick on political parties, but the Republicans, when they go after Elon Musk, I would hear Limbaugh lambasting it. I mean, it's an American car built in America using locally sourced American raw materials and American workers. It's the most American-made vehicle you could buy. I don't understand why there's all this negativity. I think it was probably because they got subsidies from the government. But, I don't really go to sporting events. I know, but I mean, I don't go to sporting events, but I got to pay for sports stadiums. I don't have children, but I pay for schools, and I don't mind. So to me, to subsidize transportation for something that's better, I don't understand why people would be against that.
So many people have been negative about Tesla. Like when he said he was going to build the cars in California, they all said, oh, you can't do that. The labor costs will eat you alive. And so many naysayers have shorted Tesla stock and say that its bankruptcy was around the corner. It didn't happen.
Exactly. I don't understand why we take such joy in tearing people down. It just seems to be where we are now as a nation. I don't know why that is, why we can't. People will say, oh, you probably hate Tesla, huh? Because you like, no, I like any kind of transportation. I like the future. I like technology. I mean, I'm one of those people that believes engineers will save the world. Who was it? Malthus said that the world will die out because you can only feed 10 people on an acre of land. Well, now you can feed 1,000 people from an acre of land. And who knows, you might be able to feed 10,000 people from an acre of land. So this idea that everything is doom and gloom, I don't get it.
You went for a ride with Elon in the Cybertruck, and actually through his tunnel, right?
That was fascinating. It's interesting because I'm one of those people that thinks to the future. I enjoy thinking ahead, but I realize I'm only 100 yards ahead. When I think of a high-speed train, I think of a Japanese bullet train that goes 200 miles an hour. When Elon thinks of high speed, he thinks of a Hyperloop that goes 800 to 1,000 miles an hour. Okay, well, I don't even fathom how you could go 800 to 1,000 miles an hour. But I like the fact that somebody is. I like the fact that somebody, we're driving around. This is the fun part about when you own the whole company like Elon. We're driving the Cybertruck. And he said, oh, that's the boring company. I said, oh, I heard about those tunnels. He goes, hey, you want to see if the Cybertruck fits in the tunnel? I said, and he said, I don't know. Nobody's ever taken one in the tunnel. Let's go over there. So it wasn't like a PR thing where, oh, we have to measure it first to make sure it fits. If it doesn't fit, it's going to be embarrassing. We pull up to the tunnel and Elon jumps out and we have maybe 1/4 of an inch on each side. He goes, we can get through here. So we go along. And again, I'm thinking like an ordinary person. I'm thinking this tunnel is like a subway. We're 50, maybe 100 feet down. No, we're not. We're 6 stories down. The tunnel is 6 stories below the surface. And I said to Elon, well, I wouldn't want to be here during an earthquake. And he goes, oh, this is the best place to be during an earthquake. And again, which makes no sense to me as a layman, but he said, well, think about it. Where would you rather be? In a boat on top of the ocean during a tsunami, or would you rather be at the bottom of the ocean in the submarine? If you're in a submarine, you won't even feel it. But if you're in the top, I said, oh, okay, that makes sense. I just like the fact that he thinks differently, you know.
Well, when people saw the Cybertruck, the universal reaction was that it was, I don't know if the word is hideous, but it was such an extreme design. I got the idea after looking at it for a while that eventually we're going to see it as acceptable. I mean, I remember when the Taurus was like a radical looking thing, and that looks like the most conventional thing in the world now. It may be
right.
that the Cybertruck is normal looking.
When Henry Ford asked people what do they want, they said faster horses.
Right.
I mean, that's the way people think. I mean, pickup trucks have looked the same since 1915. Big cab in the front with a bulbous giant grill for air, engine in the front, 3-box design, a cab with your bucket seats or a bench seat, and a bed. It's been that way since the beginning of time. Whether you love the futuristic Cybertruck or hate it, it does immediately make all other pickup trucks look old-fashioned. You know where pickup truck comes from?
No, actually, no idea.
Well, in the early days of the Model T, when they were turning them out 100 an hour, you could get any body style you want. You could get a coupe, you could get a 4-seater, or you could get a truck. If you wanted a truck and you wanted to save money, you would just order the cab and on an empty chassis. And you could buy a bed, which you would then go down to the railroad depot and pick up your truck bed and bolt it on the back of your Model T. Hence, they became known as pickup trucks. You picked up the bed and it became a truck. Or you could take the trunk off a Model T and put a bed in there and make it a pickup bed. You know, so that's sort of where the name comes from. But go ahead, what was your question?
Yeah, so do you think that, what was it like to drive the Cybertruck?
It was like any other Tesla, instant torque, a lot of power, that electric sort of, you feel it pull, and when you back off, you feel it regen. It was pretty much a Tesla in that way. The part that I found really funny is the fact that it's bulletproof. And when I asked Elon, why bulletproof? I mean, to me, it was the best corporate answer I ever heard. He said, because it's badass and super cool. I thought, okay. And you know something, that's a really honest answer. I didn't get some stupid, well, in these troubled times when we have, blah, blah, blah. He did it because he thought people would think it's cool. And I went, okay, that works for me. That's, you know, it's a pretty honest company.
I probably met him in 2009, and he was exactly like that then. And he hasn't changed very much.
No,
the world has changed.
He came to my garage back in 2008 with the very first Tesla Roadster, just to show it to me. And I have to admit, I was very impressed because prior to that, electric cars had always been slow. It was sort of a joke. They were just, most electric vehicles were glorified golf carts. They had lead acid batteries, and they had a maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 horsepower electric motor, and they went 25 miles an hour. I mean, he's the first guy to make it really viable.
Yeah, before that, it was those 60s things I was talking about that maybe went 30 miles on a if you were going downhill, that the lead acid batteries, and then suddenly we're in.
Well, if you Google Jay Leno's garage, you'll see from 1970 something, we found the Briggs and Stratton hybrid electric car that they built. It was 6 wheels, and because battery was so heavy, you had 2 wheels in the front, you had 4 in the back. The center wheels were dummy wheels. They were just there to carry the weight, and the drive wheels were the rear ones. It was a modified VW Rabbit of some sort, and it was pretty cool. But it showed you how far technology has come. You know,
there was the Woods dual electric of, I think, around 1916. They had one at the Peterson Museum.
The Woods was good. I have what's called an Owens Magnetic.
Similar.
Similar, yeah, yeah. If you notice, the lights just went. I have one of these stupid things where if you move around, the lights stay on, but if you sit down, they go off. So I don't know what happened there.
Have you been following? There's a number of new players in the electric field. One is Rivian, does this big deal with Ford. Another one is Lucid, with a lot of ex-Tesla employees. And their car is like Tesla too, I think, but it could be credible. And then there's Polestar. I think you and I were talking offline about how no one else has really been able to get traction in the electric market. A Tesla has like 60, 70% of the whole EV market, I think probably globally.
Well, my favorite thing about Tesla is I don't know about the product until it's released. I hate getting press releases for what's coming. You know, I get this all the time in my garage. People come by with internal combustion engines, and I say, is this certified by CARB for California for small? Certification is coming any day now. I always get that. And of course, it never, ever comes because it's really hard to do. And the same thing with electric. I got all these electric, people come by with these electric supercars that cost $2 million, and they're just bits and pieces of other cars, and I never quite buy it. And of course, to me, the real genius of Tesla was the fact that as he was building his car, and before his car was even for sale, he was building infrastructure. He was buying property where he could put charging stations because he knew the car is no good unless people can get power to it far from home. You know, most people build an electric car and then they go, here you go, you're on your own. Where do I plug it in? I'll plug it in your garage or at work. Well, most people can't plug in at work because work doesn't have any, that's not the employer's job, although some do now. You know, 15, 20 years ago, that didn't exist. Whereas Elon, when you bought a Tesla, you could immediately drive it to San Francisco because you could get free energy along the way.
Do you think the future of the automobile is electric? I mean, companies like Volvo seem to be definitely getting that.
From the early 1800s to 1911, steam powered everything. Then from 1911 to the year 2010, internal combustion was king. I think a baby born today probably might drive in a gas car occasionally. Will probably drive in a gasoline-powered automobile as often as people today drive in a stick shift car. It's just going to be one of those things. It's cheaper, it's more fuel efficient, it's easier to operate. Everybody I know that's bought a Tesla, and people who are not car people, are amazed by the lack of maintenance. They can't believe they don't have to go to the dealer and get an oil change and all this other kind of stuff. Even brakes last longer because you're using regen, not brakes, you know.
I always thought that the idea of automating the car would actually sort of speed up the electric revolution because you could get your electric car to plug into charging or just roll over a wireless charging pad.
Right.
But you can't really get it to automatically refuel with gasoline. That would be a lot harder to do.
Right, right. I mean, the funny part is I always meet idiots who tell me they've invented a car. And what they've done is they put solar panels on the outside so you never have to recharge it. I go, first of all, there's no solar panel available in the near future. If you park it in the sun, it's going to charge the car. You might run a little electric fan for 5 minutes, but that's about it. But, you know, I always hear that from people. There's always scam artists that are trying to sell that idea.
I did this New York Times story a while ago on the water car and the air car. The air car had a brief run in France, and they actually got all these people to invest in it. And it was a car running on compressed air. And people love that idea, you know, Jay, the idea of a car running on air.
Well, actually, the compressed air car was basically a steam car. Yeah. It was the same principle. Instead of pushing it with steam, it was pushing it with compressed air. And you could get 80 miles, 100 miles out of an air car. It is possible. It's not really that all practical, but it did work. I mean, it was viable. Yeah, but the trouble is, for new technology to succeed, it can't be equal. It's got to be superior in every single form. The Wankel engine was a revolutionary new type of engine, but it didn't get as good a gas mileage as a gas car, and it tended to use a bit more oil. So consequently, it was popular for a little while, but again, like when you bought a Mazda, they would tell you with the Wankel engine, check the oil every second gas fill up. Just check it. People go, oh, no, I'm not checking it. I'm not doing that. And that was the reason it was not successful. It didn't work.
My grandfather went from a 1962 Chevy Bel Air with a 6 and 3 on the tree to a Mazda with a Wankel engine. That was not, it wasn't going to work.
Yeah, right, exactly.
You can imagine Grandpa with that car. It did have terrible gas mileage.
Yeah.
Really terrible. You mentioned also offline that a lot of people have been saying that when the Germans got into electric cars, game over, that they would soon eclipse Tesla. And Tesla was basically alone in the marketplace. And when Audi and Porsche got into the field, you know, they would.
Yeah, I mean, Tesla has the best battery technology, bar none, of anybody out there. If Tesla falls down anywhere, it's the fact that Mercedes-Benz, Audi, Porsche, they've been making luxury interiors for cars for well over 100 years. A lot of them, not Porsche, but close to 100 years. Consequently, they have the suppliers, they know how to do it. And the interior of a Tesla really can't compare with the interior of an Audi or Mercedes-Benz. But if you're looking under the hood at the technology, it's far superior. I mean, Tesla now, I think it's a 400-mile range. And that's in your base model pretty much, I think. I'm not 100% sure of that, but it's pretty close. It's certainly way more than anything else anybody else is doing.
Including Porsche, Audi,
right,
and Mercedes. None of those people seem to be able to get the kind of range Tesla has. And consequently, they don't have much market share.
It's funny, faith in American products hit a rock bottom sometime in the mid-'70s. And it's been a long, long road back, you know. When you look at the 1949 Cadillac, that was the greatest car in the world. It was better than the Rolls-Royce. It had overhead valve engine with hydraulic lifters. It had air conditioning. It had a V8. It had an automatic transmission. And it had power windows.
And that
when you bought a 40
back roof that you could get in 49? The fastback roof?
Yeah, yeah.
49 was the last year for that.
Yeah, when you got a 49 Rolls-Royce, you got a 6-cylinder with no air, no power windows, and a manual transmission. So American technology really led all the way to the post-World War II era. Then in the 70s, everybody got lazy and the marketing guys came in and pretty much ruined everything. And now they're coming back. I mean, I'm stunned when I look at the new Corvette. They can make a mid-engine car with that kind of horsepower, that kind of technology, that much magnesium and that much aluminum for $60,000. I don't know how they do it.
I just had that as a test car, and to me, it's for $60,000 is the equal of a lot of Ferraris and Lamborghinis and
exactly
cars that cost twice as much.
Exactly, twice as much and 3 times as much.
3 times as much. Sometimes.
I mean, the base Corvette you buy now is faster than the most high performance model they had last year. I mean, I
was just reading a thing with Bob Lutz said that the mid-engine Corvette would have actually happened in 2015 if it wasn't for basically a recession and GM having to cut back on models and coming out with the C7 as a regular front engine car because they couldn't really afford it at the time.
Well, you had something that worked. Why screw it up, you know?
So are you optimistic about our electric vehicle future?
Oh, very optimistic. Yeah, I think it's going to be terrific. You know, I live in Los Angeles. When I came here in the early 70s, there were 160 days a year they told you not to go outside. It's too smoggy. Do not go outside. Do not exercise. Don't play tennis. Don't do anything you do outside because it's bad for your lungs. Now we have more than 10 times the amount of cars we had in 1970. And okay, the air is not perfect, but it's way, way better than it was back in the day. I mean, a 1977 Ford LTD parked on the street with the engine off pollutes more than a modern Ford going down the road at 60 miles an hour, which is pretty amazing.
You know, it's interesting. My first book, Forward Drive, has a lot about this in it, but if you read Ralph Nader's Unsafe at Any Speed, people assume it's just an indictment of the Corvair, but it actually has quite a lot in it about the early hearings in California about the smog.
Right.
At the time, all the automakers, this is like early 60s, they were still testifying that auto exhaust did not pollute.
Right. Yeah, like the cigarette manufacturers. I mean, hilarious. You know, I'm not one of those guys that hates Ralph Nader. I like Ralph. I think he basically trying to do good things. I think he was wrong about the car. Well, you know what's interesting? When the book came out, they actually sold more Corvairs than they did copies of the book. And GM was so incensed that this young 28-year-old lawyer was going after them, they decided to try and catch him in some sort of compromising situation. And they tried to set Nader up with a hooker or whatever, something.
He's the last guy that would work with.
Exactly. And the whole scheme backfired. And then suddenly when the New York Times and all the magazines and, well, why is the biggest corporation in the world so obsessed with this 28-year-old lawyer? That's when it hit the fan and it became a huge story. Because also, Unsafe at Any Speed was also an indictment of the Volkswagen. It had swing axles. It had the gas tank in front of the driver in case of a collision. It was a hugely dangerous automobile to drive. But the Corvairs are the one that got all the publicity because they went after GM.
You know, what's interesting now is the death rate on the highway hasn't really increased or gotten that much less, but there's an incredible increase in vehicle miles traveled, which you have to actually factor in. The population's so much greater that it actually means people are surviving accidents at a much higher rate. But the death toll is always between 30 and 50,000 people a year, and it's probably going to stay like that forever. So,
well, if people actually learned how to drive, I mean,
that would be helpful.
People think anti-lock brakes means you'll never skid, and then they sue when something, you know, if people just learn the basics of their automobile, I mean, the most common answer among teenagers why they're texting while driving is, well, driving's boring, so you need something to do. Okay, I mean, it's when you take all the work out of it, it tends to diminish the incentive.
They do say that, you know, kids don't like to drive today, and that means this is an incentive for self-driving cars and all that. But I find they're delayed in getting their license, but once they get it, they drive as much as anyone else.
Well, that's probably true. I mean, the car is not the vehicle. You know, kids can go places virtually. We had to go places in reality. You know, I mean, kids sit home. Yeah, I mean, kids get a smartphone and they call their girlfriend, hey, send me a naked picture. Okay, and you get a naked. In our day, you had to get in the car, drive to the girl's house, make sure the parents weren't there, somehow convince her to take her clothes off, take the picture. Then you have to find a drugstore 2 towns over where the guy didn't know your parents when he's developing the picture. And then when you got the pictures back, there were black bars over all the interesting parts. So you pretty much, yeah, it was a pretty much hopeless situation. You know?
I know, but that you know, you'd think we'd have a bigger population explosion now, things being easier.
Yeah, well, exactly.
But actually, only the virtual part of it is easier.
Yeah.
Well, but let me just ask you this. Maybe this can be the final question. But a lot of people had thought that the self-driving car was like imminent. And from my perspective now, I think we're going to have cars electrified before we have them as.
Well, I mean, again, that's one of those misnomers. It's another, self-driving isn't, the correct term should be driver assist or driver aids. You know, when anti-lock brakes came out, people protested, I don't want some machine interrupting my braking. No, it's not interrupting your braking. Power steering, no, I want to feel the road. I don't need power steering. No, I want to know how much pressure I'm putting on the brake. I don't need power. All these things were, again, driver enhancements. And that's really, I mean, the idea of self-driving, people think you hop in the back seat with a bottle of scotch and go to bed while a car drives you somewhere. I mean, that's not going to happen because there's always going to be a liability factor. Every time you get on an airplane, it's a self-flying airplane, except for the takeoff and the landing. The pilots don't do anything, but they still have to be there. You still need that human interaction to decide whose life is more valuable, the dog or the child in the road. and that's why I think you'll always have a human responsible in some way.
Yeah, I think the final levels, the level 4 and level 5 charging, where you actually get to being able to sit in the back seat, that stuff is just technically extremely difficult. You get into that situation we talked about.
I went with Audi to Sonoma Racetrack, and I sat in the passenger seat, and they had the car set up to go around the track as fast as it possibly could. And I was sitting there watching the steering wheel doing this by itself, going 100 miles an hour, 120 miles an hour, braking into corners. And as the tires begin to wear, I could feel the car like slide like this, and it would compensate. I mean, it was pretty amazing to sit there in the passenger seat in a race car that's racing at really top speed around the track. I mean, it was pretty amazing. So the technology is there.
Yeah, but that situation is what's called geo-fenced. There's no other traffic.
Right.
It's a lot easier in that situation. The New York City traffic, LA traffic, it's much harder. I actually just did a story for the New York Times. It's about last mile electric delivery. And all the big companies like FedEx and UPS and Amazon are ordering electric last mile delivery vehicles. And everyone thought that this would instead be a self-driving thing, that they'd be using drones or whatever. But it seems to me that those fleets are going to be electrified before they're automated.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jay. That was very stimulating. I appreciate your doing this on short notice.
Well, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Give my best to everybody at the expo.
I will do that. I will definitely do that. They will love to watch this. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.